Communication problems inside a fleet operation don't always begin with a lack of information. Sometimes the information exists, but it never reaches the people who can actually act upon it. Today, we're looking at how government fleet operations have used routine communication to bring attention to underused vehicles, give customer departments a direct voice, and make it easier for employees to raise workplace concerns. These examples approach communication from a different direction, but the underlying issue is still the same. Information has limited value when it stays inside the fleet office. So let's begin with fleet utilization. Most fleet managers can identify assets that appear to be underused. The harder part may be getting a department to release one. A vehicle can become closely tied to the department that operates it. Even when mileage drops, that department may view the asset as necessary because it could be needed later. Fleet sees the cost of keeping it, the department sees the risk of giving it up. That gap can become more difficult to address when utilization is discussed only during budget season or when a replacement request reaches someone's desk. Here's an example of what one fleet could do to keep the conversation alive throughout the year. Every month, a department head can receive an email report calling attention to possible underutilization. The report also can show what their vehicles were costing them. That detail matters because low mileage does not make an asset free. A vehicle continues to carry costs while it sits. The agency may still be paying for insurance. The asset may require preventive maintenance even when it is rarely driven. Depreciation continues, and the capital invested in that vehicle remains unavailable for another need. When departments regularly see those costs, utilization becomes more than a fleet metric. It becomes a management issue they can evaluate within the context of their own operations. So by using those monthly reports, that can eventually contribute to understanding what vehicles are underused. And the goal is to estimate the annual cost savings for the fleet. So this outcome isn't always going to come from a single request asking departments to surrender vehicles. This develops through a reporting process that repeatedly places the same information in front of the people responsible for those assets. In this case, timing is also important, of course. When a fleet is already monitoring utilization and communicating its findings each month, that could respond as those changes occur. An annual review may capture a vehicle that has been underused for months. A recurring report can identify the change sooner and provide a record showing that the pattern is continuing. The report doesn't make the decision by itself. It gives fleet and the department a sharing point for that conversation. And that starting point should include enough context to distinguish temporary changes from a longer-term decline in need. A vehicle may be driven less because of seasonal work. It may be held for emergency response or assigned to a function that can't be measured by mileage alone. So in these cases, a utilization report should bring those questions forward. It should not treat every low-mileage vehicle as an automatic candidate for removal. How the information is presented can influence how departments respond, of course. If a report arrives without explanation, a department may read it as an accusation that is wasting resources. But if fleet explains what the data shows and gives the department an opportunity to provide operational context, the report becomes part of a review process. That distinction can determine whether departments engage with fleet or defend every asset by default. Communication also matters when customer departments need to raise concerns about fleet service. So a second example in relation to this is creating a communications team to give departments a defined way to speak with the fleet director. One example is using an elected representative to serve as a spokesperson and meet with the director every quarter. This arrangement can give employees and departments a way to bring issues forward without bypassing the organization's normal reporting structure. And that can be difficult to balance. A fleet director needs accurate information about what customers are experiencing. At the same time, employees may hesitate to approach senior management if doing so could be viewed as going around a supervisor. Having a representative model creates a recognized path for that feedback. Instead of relying on informal complaints, the fleet receives concerns through someone who has been selected to communicate on behalf of the group. The value here is not simply that someone gets the director's attention. The process can help fleet leadership determine whether a concern reflects one isolated experience or a broader operational problem. A department may believe repair turnaround time has become unreasonable. Fleet may know that a delayed part affected one vehicle, but it may not realize that similar delays are changing how customers view the shop. So a representative can bring that concern into the room before frustration begins affecting the working relationship. The meetings can also help separate communication problems from service problems. Sometimes the underlying work is being completed appropriately, but the department that needs a vehicle might not know when that vehicle will be returned or why the repair took longer than expected. So in that case, the need for improvement may involve status updates rather than a change to the repair process. In other cases, feedback may reveal a recurring issue that requires closer review. Again, the quarterly schedule gives both sides time to identify patterns, but it should not become the only time a serious concern can be raised. A scheduled communication process works best when employees still know how to report an urgent problem immediately. That leads to communication within the fleet operation itself. Another idea for fleet development is creating an internal webpage for employees that can include information about upcoming events and give employees a way to send personal messages directly to the fleet director. This also gives the opportunity for fleets to encourage employees to speak with any level of management about workplace problems. Giving employees access to leadership can help surface concerns that may otherwise remain within one work area. A technician, for example, may recognize that a process is creating avoidable delays, or someone else may notice a recurring problem before it becomes visible in a performance report. If your team does not believe those concerns will be heard, the information may never move beyond a conversation between coworkers. But a direct message option lowers one barrier by giving employees another way to communicate. That doesn't mean every issue should skip the supervisor. It means the organization has a recognized route available when the normal path is not working or when the employee believes the matter needs broader attention. The response is what determines whether that route remains useful. If employees send messages and never hear about what happened, they might stop using the system. Leadership may not be able to share every detail, particularly when personal matters are involved, but it can acknowledge that the concern was received and explain whether additional review is needed. Access without follow-through can create the appearance of openness without producing meaningful communication. And the same applies to the internal webpage. Posting information in one location may make it easier to find, but employees still need a reason to check it. Content must be current, and workers need to understand how the page fits into their daily routine. A communication channel should match how employees actually work. Office employees may see an email as soon as it arrives. A technician may spend most of the shift away from a computer. So if a fleet relies only on email, some employees may receive important information much later than others. With that said, the answer is not necessarily to add more communication. More messages can make it harder to determine what needs attention. The better question is whether the right information is reaching the right person while there is still time to act on it. And it's that question that connects all three approaches. Utilization emails can translate fleet data into information department heads can use when evaluating vehicle needs, and a representative who's holding meetings can create a formal route between customers and leadership, while the internal web page can give employees another way to communicate within the operation. And none of these approaches should depend on complicated technology. The value should come from establishing a repeatable process. If department heads regularly receive utilization information, asset decisions should be harder to postpone without explanation. When a representative meets with the fleet director every quarter, concerns can be revisited to determine whether anything changed. And when employees can contact leadership, management has a responsibility to review what concerns they've raised. Communication becomes operational when someone is expected to respond, and when fleets are considering a similar approach, they should begin by identifying where information currently stops. Maybe utilization data remains inside the fleet management system without reaching department leadership. Maybe customer concerns reach fleet through several informal conversations but never become part of a documented review. Or maybe employees have ideas about shop operations but don't know who is responsible for considering them. But once you clear that gap, you can determine what kind of communication process best fits. And the process doesn't need to be elaborate. It needs to be a clear purpose and someone responsible for maintaining it. A monthly report should help people understand whether an action is needed. A recurring meeting should produce enough follow-up to show that the conversation mattered, and a direct channel to leadership should give employees confidence that their concerns will receive a fair review. It should be pretty well known at this point that communication alone won't resolve every disagreement over an asset or repair every strained relationship, but it can, however, make the underlying issue visible before it becomes harder to address. And that's the lesson here. Fleet departments already generate a considerable amount of useful information. The greater challenge may be building a path that moves beyond the person who first receives it. When that path works, a utilization report can lead to measurable savings, and a scheduled conversation can prevent customer frustration from building. And an employee's message can identify a problem that management may not yet have seen. So whether it's an email, a meeting, or an internal web page, what matters is whether it leads to a decision, a response, or a clear understanding of what needs to happen next.